I'm Stafford Smith. I teach photography at Grand Valley State University in Allendale, Michigan. I'm here to talk to you today about photography and social media through the lens of science fiction. And I came across this book in a used bookstore, Tom Swift and His Photo Telephone. And this is a 100-year-old book that actually accurately predicts the photo telephone. What's so fascinating about this to me is that more often than not, science fiction is a terrible predictor at telling us what's going to come down the pipe in the future. The genre is old enough now that we can actually look at many examples of predictions and judge for ourselves how well they had actually come true. One of my favorites, of course, is Star Trek. And although Hollywood is still cranking out new editions of the old franchise with better CGI, better explosions, more excitement, it's still beholden to some of the old iconic tropes from the old 60s TV serial, which really ground it very much in the land of poor prediction. For instance, even though this 100-year-old book of Tom Swift predicted the camera telephone, in Star Trek, the communicators are merely single-function devices. In fact, the entire utility belt is cluttered up with single-function devices, and Gene Roddenberry couldn't even predict the camera telephone. And if you continue with that train of thought, you might realize that there isn't even a camera on board the Enterprise itself. This is a 5-year mission to boldly go where no one has gone before, to seek out strange new worlds and interface with new, unimagined, unprecedented populations of all kinds of weird aliens. Nobody remembered to bring a camera. There's 500 people on that ship. And what's really funny is because if you think about it, isn't the prime directive of exploration, colonization, exploitation, and eventually tourism, all of which the camera has played a very important role in historically. And this cameraless spaceship gets even stranger if you start taking into account the personality or the character of their captain, James T. Kirk. With his unquenchable lust for female space aliens. Wouldn't you imagine that Kirk would be proudly out there with his smartphone taking selfies with his latest conquests from the Trojan asteroid to Planet X and posting them to his Facebook page, or maybe his Spacebook page, if you will? But no, there's none of that. So, maybe perhaps in the future the documentation will no longer be more important than the act itself. Now, Star Trek, like many examples of science fiction, is about first contact, that unstable period in which a lot of action must occur when two cultures come in close contact. And this is very exciting. There's all kinds of room for romance and cultural misunderstandings that lead to combat, exciting science fiction stuff. But actually, most of what happens when new worlds are conquered is that once you take it over, you need to administer it. This is where great empires come from. Actually, not so much the conquest, which of course is important in the beginning, but then you have to administer it. You have the day-to-day running of the empire. And this is really boring, especially for science fiction, because you don't need the explosions. You have administrators passing laws and sitting in committees. And so perhaps the antithesis of Star Trek is George Orwell's 1984, with its very dark look at a sort of the administration of a dystopian future. When I was growing up in the 1970s and 80s, we were very worried about this year, 1984, coming on. That we were worried about this dark Stalinist empire with this fictitious, evil, big brother coming in to pound us into submission. And we counted the years down, 1979, 1980, 81, 80. Finally, 1984 came, nothing happened. It was just like 1983. Nothing really changed. And in fact, the opposite finally occurred. Only a few years after 1984, we saw the Berlin Wall come crashing down, followed by the collapse of the Soviet Empire. And all these Stalinist states, one by one, collapsed, opened their doors, and now they are safe for tourism, let's say. So that aspect of 1984 didn't come true. However, Orwell was dead on with his idea of round-the-clock surveillance in the form of a household appliance, which you can interpret as the internet, your smartphone, and now even we have smart TVs that are almost exactly like the TVs in George Orwell's book. The new Samsungs actually come with a warning label, be careful, this TV will actually record casual conversation, so don't talk too closely to it. However, as different as 1984 is from Star Trek, there is one thing in which they are kind of like twins. And that is, in both cases, the authors imagine that technology in the future will actually be used to enhance male power, and by male physical power, to enhance acts of aggression and manly behavior, if you will. For all of the Enterprise's great technological capabilities on Star Trek, a lot of disputes between Captain Kirk and aliens are settled with fists. They almost always descend into fistfights. In 1984, with all that incredible surveillance and technology, the threat of a good punch in the face from Big Brother is what is necessary to keep the population in line. So there's this idea that technology will actually enhance masculinity. However, history will show us that the reverse is true. The more technologically advanced we get, the less masculine we need to be, the less brute force is necessary. That technology takes care of that. We don't need to learn how to shoot a bow and arrow, which takes 10 to 20 years to learn how to do well. We don't need to learn how to use swords. We don't need to learn how to ride horses. So what science fiction is really telling us a lot about is sort of more fantasy than predictions about the future. That, in fact, what technology leads us to is a more nuanced power, a more subtle power that is less overt and brutal and aggressive, and actually a lot more soft. It's a soft power that relies on compliments and nurturing responses. And so you could think that, in short, Big Brother has actually turned out to be Big Mother. So what do I mean by Big Mother, and how does that relate to photography and social media, and how is that enhanced by technology? Well, if you think about how we all start out in life, everyone starts out as an infant. This is a very important time in everyone's life. This is where the world for everyone is basically a giant breast, and we have one purpose, which is to suckle at that breast, get bigger, and then also to look at that sort of hazy face beyond the breast, that one that's looking down on us, and bond with it. This is where the key is to this linkage. The great psychologist Sigmund Freud tells us that this is a healthy form of narcissism. It's a period where every whim, every complaint is met, that someone takes care of everything for us. And while we grow out of this and eventually get to the point where we no longer need our parents and can go off into the great wide world and make our own paths, we never forget it. Deep down, it's lying there, latent. And if perhaps through wealth or fame or celebrity, we can be indulged, we can return to a narcissistic state. However, for most of us, this is not possible until now. Social media actually taps in to this latent tendency towards narcissism by rewarding us with compliments in the form of likes for the slightest of accomplishments that you can possibly imagine. Reposting someone else's cat videos, for example. We don't even make the cat videos, we just say, post a timeline, and suddenly like, and we feel good. Imagine if you weren't getting that affirmation in terms of likes. Aren't you disappointed when you don't get likes on a photograph? This is very much like the pat on the back for something very trivial that your mother or father would give you when you were an infant or a toddler. So what has happened with social media that technology has made possible, something that was completely unforeseen, is that suddenly everyone with a Facebook page or some form of social media is able to get an audience. We are able to get attention that was not afforded to anyone unless they were celebrities. That this is the attention that we have been craving since we left our mother's arms. And now technology makes this attention possible, and we are just sucked right back into it. Think about what the selfie is. When someone is out there with their phone taking selfies, Isn't that really a cry for attention? Isn't it saying, look at me, look what I'm doing, look where I am, look who I'm with? However, I think there's actually a word missing off the end of those declaratives. It's, look what I'm doing, mommy, look where I am, mommy. That's this crying out for our digital mothers to acknowledge our presence. Imagine, if you will, Facebook as an infinitely breasted goddess with some 800 million babies suckling at her digital teats. Now, I'm not here as some Luddite trying to wean you off Zuckerman's binary booby beast, but I think the analogy as Facebook as some sort of modern day Artemis of Ephesus actually has some validity. And if Facebook was actually a religion with almost 1 billion subscribers, it would actually supplant Buddhism as the 4th largest religion on earth. So unlike George Orwell's 1984, where the surveillance is very intrusive and backed by the threat of violence for noncompliance, today's social media has a completely different facade. It's much gentler. Instead of we are watching, it's more like we are listening and eager to give you praise for whatever you wish to tell us. I mean, who can resist that, right? It's very important for modern surveillance to be able to short circuit or shut down our internal warning systems, because being under someone's gaze is threatening. It's like being stalked by a predator. Think about when someone tries to photograph you in public. I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but if you see a stranger taking a picture of you or your children, it feels intrusive. It feels almost like aggressive. It's a violation of your privacy. It feels gross. And I think this is tied to this sort of internal warning system to get us to either fight or flee. Now, a lot of photographers who are engaged in the act of street photography, where the whole genre is based on catching people unaware out in public, these photographers have to come up with ways of dealing with this. And they have different ways. Gary Winogrand, very large man, 6'3", 200 pounds or so, would intimidate people into not saying anything. Whereas on the other extreme, you have petite Diane Arbus, who was so disarming, or was disarming in her personality, that people just relaxed and opened up to her. We also have someone like Philip Lorca di Corsia, who used a very powerful telephoto to catch people from like a block away, and then if anyone complained, he would be surrounded by legal counsel to frighten them away. But whatever method one uses, you have to be able to combat people not liking their photos taken by strangers. And this is kind of funny, because while people have this reaction to being photographed, they don't mind being tracked when they use their credit card. They don't mind when their car rolls through an Easy Pass toll booth. We don't mind almost every single app on our smartphones tracking us and giving our data to some unknown person. We don't mind that our web searches are being monitored. This is much, much more intrusive, actually, than a stranger taking a single photograph out in public of how we are walking down the street. It doesn't really paint much more than a two-dimensional picture, whereas your purchases, your searches online tell much, much more about you. But somehow that kind of surveillance doesn't bother us, as does a bipedal person with a large phallic-looking lens catching us unawares out in public. So a long time ago, there was a superstition that when someone would be photographed, the camera would actually steal part of their soul. And we laugh about this as kind of naive, but in a very strange, ironic twist, it's actually not that far off. Because every purchase we make, every selfie we post, every Google search we make, we are actually creating a very three-dimensional sculpture of ourselves online, sort of an avatar that walks and lives and breathes. It's much more in depth than any kind of portrait a camera could make. So we are creating, through our activity online, digital doppelgangers that are so sophisticated that not only do they give us a portrait of what we look like now, but they're also they can tell people what we will look like tomorrow. They are portraits that enable people to make predictions of our future behavior. that we are making commodities of ourselves every time we participate in any way in the data sphere, and creating these avatars or sort of digital souls that are bought and sold in a virtual slave market. So imagine, if you will, a modern day Odysseus descending into Hades, not to commune with fallen comrades in the Trojan War, but actually to visit all the digital doppelgangers that he's created from all of his online activity, from Google searches over cholesterol to late night viewings of, I don't know, Japanese prank videos. Thanks to our digital mother, I'd like to posit that social media is the new camera, capable of taking much higher resolution portraits of each and every one of us than what even the best digital cameras can hope to achieve.